the impact of the G20, not just on South Africa, but the continent at large. I'm going through this in big, broad strokes because I want to bring in analysis very quickly. Spoke about the green shoots that the country is beginning to experience. But at the core of it, right towards the end, as the president was about to conclude his address, it became clear, at least in my mind, why the president wanted to really make this speech. And it does appear designed to respond directly to the United States and indeed the posture of that country's president. He says it is regrettable that the United States, a founding member of the G20, chose not to participate. Even more unfortunate, their reasons for not attending, and that is that it is based on unfounded allegations of a genocide against South Africa's white population. And he says that earlier this week, the country handed over the G20 presidency to the United States, but observing appropriate protocols. It's as if the president really wanted to make the point here. Even his language was one to look at very critically. And he says that he has heard in the past week the United States president who suggested that South Africa would be not invited, would be uninvited to the G20 in the United States. And he says South Africa is a founding member of the G20. And I suppose with those words, it does not need inviting. If anything, South Africa is going to continue to participate as a full member of the G20. And so it's going to participate in full, and it will remain active, but also be a constructive member of the G20. He continues saying that South Africa continues to be a friend of the people of the United States. Again, very carefully chosen words, and in a way almost wanting to separate the actions of the people in the White House versus the population of the United States. And he says that we'll continue to engage with the United States with respect. I just want to end it there, and I want to invite into the conversation now my colleague Vuyo Mvogo, who is at the Union Buildings, and alongside him, Dr. Kingsley Makubele, who is going to react for us. To both of you, good evening, and thank you very much indeed. Vuyo, I don't know if you were able to listen to me as I wrapped up quickly. My thinking around this, and you're welcome to really give us your inputs here as to what you thought of this speech. The president, my thinking here is that he has convened this particular address tonight in order to respond directly to the United States and in particular the behavior of that country's president. That's my summation of the speech. I don't know what you made of it.
I think you are indeed correct, Goli. I listened to every word that you've said, and I think you've captured it fairly well. But what I would have wanted more of was for the president to give perhaps a clearer sense of where he thinks this relationship is going to go, whether it's about fixing the relationship, which is what he, the deputy president, the international relations minister, and everyone involved have been saying, that they want, including the trade minister, Pakstow, that we still want that relationship. But what happens if what appears to be President Trump's stance continues to happen? Is this a relationship that you're going to keep at all costs? And what will be the implications of that? He is making it clear, and though not in as many words as one would have thought he would have done. In other words, he does make it clear that, one, South Africa doesn't regret at all having done things the way that it has done over the year that it has had the G20 presidency, and that he doesn't think or seem to think that the United States during its term will actually be able to roll back. He seems to be confident that he has read the room correctly, and his reading of the room is that everyone involved is not going to allow the United States to roll back the victories that this particular forum, the G20, has been able to secure or do, especially over the past 3 or 4 years, where the voice of the global South and Africa, of course, needless to say, included, has been heard more. And the world is also beginning to see that no one should be, or at least to take seriously, the need for particular strong men not to hold things back. In other words, the world must continue and do what it needs to do, which is encapsulated or captured in the declaration of the G20 summit last week. But one would have really wanted to hear more from the president around that trade deal, where that trade deal is, and whether they're still hoping as the government that a possibility exists that will get a drill that will actually satisfy all and sundry. We didn't get a lot of that. But also what is at stake, if indeed that doesn't happen. Yes, we've begun to engage other nations and blocs to look at what can be done outside of relationships that people already have with the United States of America. But that's if he had said those things. But he didn't. But of course, the negotiations, we've been told, are continuing. But an update sooner rather than later, in my view, remains essential. You've already begun seeing your Chinas coming in, where the United States of America has decided to come out. But is that trend going to continue at other levels? So hopefully, over time, we'll get more information than perhaps we were able to get today. I think by all accounts, even though he said a lot of the things that people have wanted him to say, my take is that he just hasn't done enough.
All right.
That to give the nation the confidence that it needs about where he is taking this country beyond this big, wonderful summit that we were able to host as a nation. Where to from here is the big question for me.
Vuyo, please stay exactly where you are. I want to bring into the conversation Dr. Kingsley Makhubele. Dr. Makhubele, good evening to you. Thank you for making time for this important discussion. I'm not going to poison your mind. You've heard the president speak. What did you make of his speech? What do you think the real focus was here?
Good evening, Toli, and good evening, Vuyo. I think the president's statement was better nuanced this time around. The biggest worry has been, given the events of the last 2 weeks, if the president is going to come up with very strong rhetoric and very strong language towards the United States, which would further indicate an escalation in the challenges that South Africa is having with the United States. But I think he dealt with that very well. Toli, he was able to identify the fact that the administration took decisions on the basis of misinformation, not disinformation. He attributed disinformation to certain characters that are emerging within the country in a way. So to draw that line, I think he's left the door ajar for the United States administration to come back and say, indeed, we were misinformed about this issue of genocide. So the door, it's left ajar. There's no climbing of the escalation ladder in that respect. So he did very well in terms of that. But he also addressed South Africans, give them assurance about what South Africa intends to do within the G20, explaining what the G20 is all about. And he was quite correct to indicate that There's no single power that can unilaterally reconfigure the G20 without the will of total members. So he's quite straightforward about that. Clearly, the biggest fear has been the escalation. And I think he was quite correct not to go in nitty-gritty of issues that are involved between the United States and South Africa by indicating, Xoli, that we need to go beyond, what has happened between the two countries. What requires to be done moving forward, and I think that will be identified by relevant ministries and departments within government, it's the question of lobbying lawmakers. He was quite correct that people have been lobbying the United States. Does it mean those who have been lobbying the US from South Africa have succeeded more than what the country is supposed to do to better position the country? So there's a need to look at how to work with lawmakers in the United States. And he was quite correct to explain the history of the United States, the people of America in terms of the support. Xoli, you will recall that when Reagan wanted to veto the Anti-Apartheid Act, it was overturned by a lot of support from local government, a lot of lobby that was done by the liberation movement, and the ANC in particular during those days was able to turn around this issue. So he was quite straightforward to indicate the strong bond that exists between the two countries and moving forward. And I think the language was better nuanced. I was nervous, I must say, that we're going to hear the strong voice that everyone is thinking, because the popular view is that the president should be very strong, should do that. You don't deal with that. You don't deal with diplomacy in that manner. He's been very diplomatic. The language he used chose better choreographed speech, I must say.
Yeah. Vuyo, come back into the picture and let's discuss what you made of the president when he seems to move away from Washington and address Americans almost directly, that South Africa has a good relationship with the people of the US, whether you talk about the activist community that sits in the US when South Africa was in trouble, particularly during the years of apartheid. What do you think he was trying to drive there? Because at least in my little understanding of it, in a way, he's saying the people in Washington are behaving very strangely, not observing protocol, but we have a relationship with you, the people of the US. Does it talk to part of what is framed in the papers today? And that is to say that we have to chastise the people in the White House, albeit diplomatically, as Dr. Makubele says, but also be prepared that we are going to go into some difficult times, but that difficulty is going to be short-term pain, I suppose, until Trump leaves office.
The president seems to be relying a lot, Xoli, on what other Americans who actually came here and have been cooperating throughout the South Africa's presidency. And here you can specifically mention the business community. When the B20 ended, the Americans were there to take over. In other words, not do or snub the B20 the way Donald Trump's administration has actually done. And from the conversations we've had with everybody who's been involved in that part of the work, the Americans have actually been very supportive, and they've ensured that there was maximum cooperation and participation on their part. So that's one a part of America kind of taken care of. And if you look at the civil society organizations, I mean, our Simon Marks, who has been here this past week, has been telling us about conversations that he's been having with civil society organizations and leaders ahead of the Leaders Summit, how they were intent and hell-bent on actually cooperating fully with South Africa. Now, add to that the fact that the tide is changing within America itself, if you look at some of the latest polls, if you look at some of the reports, your Fox News, who have been traditional supporters of a Donald Trump or a Donald Trump presidency, the tide is beginning to change. And from what your European Union, from what the America's traditional allies, your Australias, your United Kingdoms have been saying, and how they have cooperated with South Africa throughout this South Africa's presidency of the G20 up until that very last minute, and that unprecedented step of a declaration being adopted on day one, notwithstanding what everybody knew was the attitude of the United States of America. So the president, in other words, of South Africa broadly, is on a sound footing, and if the president and his administration are really reading the room the way I'm suggesting they probably have, then there is hope for a future that will probably be different to some of what some of us may fear. But if the worst was indeed to happen, we still have allies, we still have people who, if they really demonstrate a backbone and are really committed to that declaration that they have signed up for, then we are, in my view, the worst may not yet to come. But all that said, you are talking about a Donald Trump here. But I want to add another dimension, which is the internal dimension I did mention a little earlier. You have ANC, or some people within the ANC, who are agitating for an early departure of President Cyril Ramaphosa. Now, we're looking forward as political journalists to see what will happen at the next meeting of the National Executive Committee. But the people are already warning that if the Cyril Ramaphosa, who emerged over the past few weeks in particular, is anything to go by, he may just steady the ship, and the ANC needs him. And one thing the expelled former ambassador, South African ambassador to the United States, what he said is anything to go by. He pointed out to the fact that you have had a Jacob Zuma who didn't finish his term. You have had a Thabo Mbeki who also didn't finish his term. But did that make things look better for the ANC? The answer we all know. So you do now need, or President Cyril Ramaphosa needs to then go into that next NEC meeting and with a strategy, the same strategy Kingsley Mabul was talking about, where you are a lot more nuanced, you tease out the issues that need to be teased out. In other words, we need a stronger and better country. Now, who exactly will actually do that? You're going to need very sane and sober minds in that NEC meeting, so they don't repeat things that or acts that they have done in the past, but which haven't advanced, one, the interests of the ANC itself, to be frank, but which also didn't advance the interests of the country as well. That is going to be an important conversation that President Cyril Ramaphosa will need to have within the ANC. That remains the most powerful bloc or constituency within the government of national unity. That conversation must also be had parallel to what is being said about where to with regard to our relationship with the United States of America, which remains a strong and powerful trading partner, but also our relationship with the rest of the world, and not shoot ourselves in a foot.
Dr. Makubele, let's come back. Vuyo brings into the equation a very interesting dimension here, and that is that of a President Ramaphosa who I think the ANC spokesperson was asked during the recent NEC whether he was at the departure lounge, and the response was firmly, no, we know nothing of a departure lounge here. I don't know whether you want to weigh in directly or quickly to that, Dr. Makubele. I'm still hung up on a Donald Trump, as you have said, who, in my view, does not reason. If anything, his own administration ends up reacting to what he has already done. And so he asks for no advice, it would appear, and simply acts, and people around him have to now field media questions around what the president has suddenly decided on. Yes, President Ramaphosa was measured, as you've put it, in his address tonight, particularly around the behavior of the United States. Diplomatically, you say that is what is expected of us. But a Donald Trump, who is probably still hung up on how the G20 presidency was handed to the United States over and above a declaration that was adopted when he said expressly that he prefers that there be no declaration. Obviously, President Ramaphosa was not going to adhere to that. Are you saying that Trump is a reasonable man, is my question?
You know, Koli, what would have been good for the president to put on record tonight was that he intends, I know he's perhaps scared of burning his fingers once again, to say he's going to send a delegation to seek more clarity from the United States at a bilateral level on this question of the exclusion of South Africa, and that there will be an engagement in that process, one. Then the second thing is to speak to the rest of the members in the G20 to try to explain where South Africa stands on the pronouncement made by the United States. It would have been very useful to put that on record that South Africa is open for engagement with the United States to resolve this impasse. I think the president missed a little bit of an opportunity around that. But I think, Koli, there's no harm in continuing to pressure the United States and reach out using the soft power diplomacy that you spoke about earlier on that South Africa possesses to enter into a dialogue with the United States to resolve all this misinformation. Now that this door remains ajar, perhaps the United States will take that opportunity. But it will be a misnomer for South Africa to think that you have to wait for Donald Trump to leave office. This thing is entrenched within the US system. This rhetoric began even during the Biden administration when they started coming up with different bills to censure South Africa and so on. So there's a need to look into reaching out structurally within the United States, both at the House and at the White House, to try to enter in some dialogue. It's in the best interest, not only of South Africa, also of the United States, in terms of its engagement with South Africa. The perception that Africans are having about the United States is not healthy. To raise issues, even including what, the unsavory words that President Trump used in his first term to describe Africa as something of a whole that I wouldn't like to say here. So to try to resolve that, it doesn't help the position and the stature of the United States to behave and conduct itself in that manner. It's in their best interest to have a better relationship with South Africa and Africa. They picked up now a fight with Nigeria. To have a dialogue with the United States policymakers around these issues, both at the White House and at the Capitol Hill. It will be useful to do that. Do we have institutional capacity to deal with that? Which is something that I'm really worried about, because up to now, Koli, we don't have any representation in the United States. At ambassadorial level, so to say. If we were having an ambassador essentially, Koli, it's a master key. It opens every door to really try to exert South Africa's influence. I still suspect that perhaps Donald Trump has not agreed to whatever South Africa has proposed. I can't imagine South Africa will stay for such a long time without recommending anyone as an ambassador to the United States, given the strategic importance of that mission. So I think there are issues that can be better resolved using all types of diplomatic approaches and nuances that South Africa has to go to the drawing board now to try to salvage this relationship. the president was quite correct, clearly, not to go to the specific of AGOA and so on. Because once you resolve the relationship between the countries, a lot of issues would fall in place. I mean, the United States, during this conference, has announced that it's going to give about 4.3 or $4.6 billion to the global fund to deal with issues related to HIV and AIDS. A big improvement and a retraction from the initial position. So we need to encourage this kind of coming back of the United States in the main fold, particularly the administration, in the main fold in dealing with some of these global challenges that we have. I think there are a lot of issues that we and the United States as a country have to deal with, including our cooperation around defense and security matters and so on. So there's a need to reach out.
Dr. Kingsley Makhubele, thank you very much for your time and analysis tonight. Thanks indeed for borrowing us your time. We are going to keep the conversation going, and so we are not going anywhere. In fact, if anything, we're going to bring now into the conversation the reaction from the political parties. And first up, it is the Good Party's Brett Herron, the Secretary General. Good evening to you, sir. Thank you very much for making time for us. Talk to us about what you made of President Ramaphosa's speech tonight.
Good evening. Look, I thought the president had earned the right to be a little self-satisfied by the success of the G20. He had stood up to the bullying of Donald Trump. He had stood up for a progressive set of values that came out of the G20 around inequality, sustainability, and the international finance mechanisms and debt of emerging markets. The president in South Africa really withstood almost a year now of attacks from the United States based on disinformation or spreading disinformation. And I thought that the president's response was both self-satisfied and well-earned, but also measured in the way he was dealing with the United States, which was contrary to what media speculation has been over the last week, that South Africa has really decided to give up on the United States.
Yeah, and I really want to come in on that particular angle of the United States. You say the president was measured. I've just asked my previous guest who left just now whether President Ramaphosa, in his being measured, he is addressing someone who is deserving of that, and your view on whether diplomacy and continuing to toe the line, so to speak, is what is going to gain South Africa the stature that it clearly occupies on the world stage right now, and therefore not going directly into the mud with President Trump. Is that the perfect strategy, you think?
Well, I mean, with the current incumbent in the United States White House, it's hard to know what the perfect strategy is. The president was, I think, acting responsibly in being measured rather than retaliating with a full-blown attack on the United States and its spreading of disinformation. I think we must all understand that President Trump is not getting this disinformation from organizations in South Africa. I mean, he has the ability to be well informed about what is going on in South Africa, what is really happening here, and the information that he's spreading or the disinformation that he's spreading, he must know it's false. But what these organizations in South Africa do is give him cover for that disinformation, both in his own country and in South Africa. So the president's restraint, I think, leaves the door open for engagements to continue, but also, maybe more importantly, allows for business-to-business relationships to thrive, as they apparently are, and with many American businesses doing business in South Africa, it was important for the president to provide the space for them to continue to trade with South Africa directly, regardless of the diplomatic tensions between the two countries.
I want to borrow from you the word you've just used, that the president exercised restraint. And in that same vein of exercising restraint, do you think that South Africa should start dealing with the people that the president says are within his own country that are responsible for the behavior in Washington? How do you think that should be dealt with? Because if we use the word restraint, it means if President Ramaphosa is going to be restrained or exercise restraint against retaliating against Trump, then it means that the people that are feeding Trump with information, if they are acted upon by South Africa's law enforcement agencies, for example, it then gives Trump the reason to once again stand up and say, you see, I've been telling you this is what is happening. They are now dealing with them legally. Do you think that that is perhaps another complication for President Ramaphosa if he were to act against the individuals whom he says are feeding Washington with wrong, false information?
I think you're correct, and it's a correct way of posing that question, because the law does provide for some of the conduct that we've seen to possibly be a criminal offense, the criminal offense of economic terrorism, which is quite a serious offense. But if South Africa was to prosecute these bad faith players who are spreading disinformation about a genocide, about land grabs, that may well feed into this persecution narrative that Donald Trump has leveraged. As I said earlier, I don't believe, and I think it would be naive to believe that Donald Trump believes the stuff he's saying, and that the information that he is relying on is coming from these bad faith players. We know that they go to the United States, AfriForum, Solidarity, the DA even, the Freedom Front Plus, and they meet with Americans. It's never clear at what level in the United States government these people are that they meet with, but they seem to be heading out there to meet with whoever will listen to them. I don't personally believe that Donald Trump is basing his narrative on this information. This narrative that he's driving is a cover for whatever gripe he's got with South Africa at the moment.
Yeah. Let's come back to what President Trump, which is what President Ramaphosa addressed tonight as well. What President Trump seemed to suggest in the week was that South Africa would be uninvited to the G20 summit that's going to take place in the US. The President Ramaphosa says, but South Africa is a founding member of the G20, therefore suggesting it does not need inviting to the G20. How do you think that should be dealt with by our government? And I'm conscious of the fact that you are a party in government as well, given your party leader, who is an executive member of this administration.
Yeah, look, I think that the president should exercise quiet diplomacy, which is South Africa's go-to form of diplomacy, in engaging with the other G20 members. As the president rightly said, South Africa is a full member of the G20 and a founding member, and we have every right to participate in all G20 activities. In fact, we co-chair, or the G20. There's the presidency is made up of the current presidency, the past presidency, and the future presidency of the G20. So as the immediate past presidency of the G20, we are co-chairs or co-presidents of this G20 that is handed over to the United States. So I think some engagement with the other G20 members would be necessary. And the United States Trump may well carry out his threat to make it impossible for South Africa to participate. And we will have to rely on the other members of the G20 to assist us in participating if that's the case, and if we haven't been able to repair our relationship with the Trump administration.
Brett Herron, thank you very much for your time and your analysis, weighing in on the President Cyril Ramaphosa's speech tonight, thanking South Africa for putting our best foot forward as a country during the hosting of the G20 summit, and indeed responding to some of what has been coming out of the White House. All right, we are going to continue and sustain this conversation. We're continuing all the way to 8:30 tonight, so do stay with us. Let's add now to this particular conversation UNISA's Political Science Department's Professor Dirk Coetzee, and alongside him is international relations researcher Mikatekiso Kubai. And you are also welcome to engage us as viewers tonight. We can take your comments and questions on our WhatsApp line. We are on 072 110 5584, or you can call us on 010 594 6010. You're also welcome to engage us on the social media platform X. Our handle is at Newzroom 405. All right, let's continue with these discussions then. Professor Coetzee, let me start with you. And as I usually do, let me ask for your overall impression of President Ramaphosa's speech tonight. What do you think the key messaging was? What are your key takeouts?
Well, good evening, first of all. There were quite a number. I don't think it was only one. It started very much about focusing on the impact on South Africa and the South African society in general, especially here in the north, Johannesburg, where it happened, and the participation of it, and the fact he often referred to the notion of Ubuntu, and the fact that those who came here said that they felt very welcome and very at home to some extent here in South Africa. So he praised us all in that respect. At the same time, I think what he then did is he went a little bit into the summit's declaration, and he highlighted a few things which I think were quite important. The first one was about the notion of inequality, which is one of the three concepts of the theme of the summit. And he referred to the Stiglitz report and the fact that there's an international panel that they want to establish on inequality in general. The same with debt, especially in other African countries. South Africa is actually also affected by that. And the decisions that were taken and commitments made in order to address that and to assist countries, which is starting with ourselves. It's a very important component. We spend something like 22 cents out of the grant in repaying of our own debt. Climate change was something also that he spoke about. Now, imagine President Trump was at this event. Then I think this declaration most possibly would not have been there. There would not have been a consensus on this. So there's, in a sense, an advantage under this circumstances of disadvantage, that the absence of President Trump, in a sense, made a consensus possible, which I can almost guarantee would not have been possible if he attended it. Another point which he didn't talk about is the Troika. And as we've heard now already in the previous discussion about the three components of it: South Africa, the outgoing president, the US, the incumbent one from tomorrow, and the UK, the incoming one. The question will be, is this at all going to function? Or is it going to be a one-country US way in which they are going to do all the preparations and all the aspects associated with it? And then lastly, the last component is what you've talked about now quite substantially, and this is about this South Africa-US diplomatic relations, the issue about whether there's a genocide or not, and the effect of it in terms of trade relations, as well as the relations with AfriForum and Solidarity.
Yeah.
So I think it was a wide-ranging focus, but very much unemotional. And I think he emphasized South Africa's long-standing relationship with the US. And I think for those watching in the White House, which they certainly did, it didn't give them ammunition to shoot back.
Interesting indeed. I'm going to come back on the G20 Troika that you mentioned there. Let's bring into the conversation Mikatekiso Kubai. Good evening to you, and let's get your thoughts firstly on what you made of President Ramaphosa's speech tonight.
Good evening to you and your viewers, Xoli. I think it was a good, statesman, address, to the nation. He essentially is thanking the country, for working together, working actually very hard to pull off the success of a G20 presidency that even some may have thought might flounder a little bit. So he's congratulating everyone that made an effort, to make this a success. And he goes on to, list a few, successes, such as, what's contained in the declaration on issues of unsustainable debt, among others, cost of finance, and so on. I mean, I know ourselves at T20, we worked very, very hard, on some of these issues throughout the whole year, and it was certainly not easy. So to hear the president actually address and give pay tribute to all country folk that worked very hard, held hands together and put in a proper shift, but it's gratifying. It's really, really good.
Yeah.
But President also reminds all of us that despite the issues and challenges that we have with the United States, it's of course important to nonetheless, in any event, right? That's what they do all the time. You never stop. You never cease and say that, no, that, country does not like us. Therefore, you continuously, try to persuade, you continuously try to, find, a common ground, for improved trade, improved, cultural relations and other, dimensions, of state-to-state and people-to-people relations, and so on. So it doesn't stop at, now AGOA is, South Africa is, being, removed from AGOA, or, you don't stop there and say that, no, it's all over. You carry on. That's part of, statecraft. That's part of the responsibility of the state to continue, negotiating, to continue, keeping up the effort, to find solutions and so on.
Yeah.
It's correct. I mean, it's an important, trading partner. Even though, yes, of course, we must expand, our trade relationships. We've got and harness and improve, those that we currently have, such as China, the EU, the continent, and so on. Every trade relationship, matters, and we have to, approach it, in that fashion. I think it's very much correct. It was a really good, address to the nation, I think.
All right. Let's bring into the conversation a caller, Ruth, who talks to us from Centurion tonight. Ruth, good evening to you. Thank you for talking to us. Give us your thoughts on what you made of what the president spoke to the nation and said tonight.
Try again? You're talking to me now.
All right. I think, yes, indeed, we are talking to you.
Very good.
So please go ahead.
Yeah, so I say Donald Trump say he's not decide against with Afrikaners in South Africa. I'm not a politician,
Yeah.
But he's changing his note as well now, Julius. Kill a boer, kill a farmer. And I'm very positive about my country. I'm very sure we're going to be very good in a short time.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know whether you think the same, but they cannot try and kill us as white Afrikaners because we are trained for that.
Mm.
I'm not fighting with you.
Yeah.
Those is genocide. Yes, they do take people's farm and they kill a boer, kill a farmer. That is sung by, what is his name, Julius, nee. Kill a boer, kill a farmer. And then what happens to the farm afterwards?
All right. Let me understand your point before I let you go. What are you saying? Are you saying that you support what President Trump is saying about this country, given that he has now accommodated some Afrikaners in the United States because he believes there's a genocide?
Let's make a long story short. What scares me is that he said that he's going to stop all support to South Africa.
Yeah.
That is more scary. Financial support to that is more scary.
Yeah.
To me. Well, I run my own company, so that is not really for me. You talk about the poorest of the poorest, and the people here, they're stealing the money from the poorest of the poorest.
Yeah.
So that to me is, if he says he's going to stop any support, financial support to South Africa,
Yeah.
if we don't get in line, that to me is scary.
I get you. So that is what scares you. If United States withdraws financial support to South Africa. The president, so let me ask you this then. The president says tonight, the reason that President Trump is reacting or behaving in this way towards South Africa is because of some people here in South Africa who go to America to feed that country with information that is incorrect. Do you agree with him?
I wouldn't. I'm not in America. I wouldn't jump there and all of that. That is, I jumped there and all of that. But in Africa, Julius sings in the streets, kill a boer, kill a farmer. That is a very similar thing. Or is it not?
Okay.
He does not sing that anymore.
All right. Okay. Ruth from Centurion, thank you very much for your time. Well, you're welcome to continue calling us if you want to engage in this discussion. Let's get back to the analysts that are with us. Dirk Kotze, let me come back to you. You have mentioned the G20 Troika, and I really want us to come back and bring this conversation home. But before we do that, let's discuss that troika, because when we talk about a G20 troika, so South Africa is going to hand over to the United States, which the president says they did this week. But it's not immediately over because the United States still needs to get almost all of the information, including the website, by the way, that America needs to get. And that means the content of the G20 preps that were done here in South Africa. And so that work must be handed over. And then there is another country, which is the United Kingdom, that's going to host the G20 in 2027. Do you foresee a situation where the UK's Prime Minister might possibly be forced to play some mediator role between the US and South Africa, given the posture of America towards this country right now?
Yes, it's an interesting question, this. I don't think we all know very much about how the troikas function because, the G20 is not a formalized organization. It does not have a headquarters. It does not have a secretary general. It does not have offices where they can keep all these documents. It moves from the president of the one year to the next one to the next one. There's not sort of collective legacy or documentation and other things together, which brings it together. So it's quite similar to BRICS, which also doesn't have that. And it makes it difficult compared to other international organizations, even the Commonwealth that South Africa is part of. It's much more organized. And I think this is one of the aspects that they might have to think about in future as the G20, as it is becoming by de facto larger and larger. what I've never really thought about is that the US was, now with this year, South Africa's year of the presidency, actually already part of the Troika as the incoming president. But when one has never heard anything about the functioning of the Troika in that context, I think the fact that President Trump at a very early stage already indicated that they don't want to participate in the summit, at least, of the G20, to a large extent paralyzed the Troika.
Yeah.
But what is going to be interesting now with this coming year, 2026, with the US as the president and the UK as the incoming president, and the fact that they have actually very good relations with each other at the diplomatic level, that there might be some aspects of it that will be revived. I personally anticipate that South Africa's role will be suppressed, will be very low. And at the same time, I think for South Africa, it is important to be part of it because there's some, what one can call legacy projects from this year. Some task teams that President Ramaphosa established on various issues, like this inequality one, about climate change also. And if they are not there, that it might get lost.
Yeah.
So I think that is part of the role of the Troika, that it's simply unclear at the moment how it's going to function.
All right. Before I go to Mikatekiso Kubai, let me quickly take a caller from Pretoria. Simon, good evening to you. Give us your sense of your impressions of the president's speech tonight.
Good evening, Polly. Yeah, really, I think we are, as a nation, we are fully behind our president. And I think as a South African, I'm very proud of what the president has done. In fact, all of the parties that were involved in setting up this G20 is not only for the benefit of South Africa, but this is for the benefit of the African continent that has always been ignored by the rest of the world. I think we should not pay much attention to what Donald Trump is all about. And I think I agree with the president. We should just give a short-term response, and I think his response is very articulate in terms of what Trump seems to be doing, and I think we should not fall, prey to what he wants to do.
Yeah.
Let's focus on the positive thing. It's just to bring the African continent in the realm of development in the rest of the world.
All right. Simon, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts tonight. Let's quickly take Beverly from Potchefstroom. Beverly, good evening to you. Give us your thoughts.
Good evening. I'm backing up our president all the way. It was a fantastic G20. I'm a proud white South African woman that's going to stay in this beautiful land of ours, which we can all share with one another. And I'm very proud of our land and everything that they did now. And I pray that with all these commissions that are going on, that things will get sorted out so that our beautiful children in this land can have a beautiful future. And Trump doesn't know what he's talking about.
Beverly from Potchefstroom, thank you very much indeed for those words of encouragement. All right, remember, you can send us your comments and questions on our WhatsApp line. It's 072-110-5584, or you can also call us on 010-594-6010. You can also engage us on our social media platform. It's the X platform, what used to be Twitter. Our handle is @Newzroom 405. Okay, let me come back to my guests. Mikatekiso Kubai, let me bring you into the conversation. I'm actually going to borrow from what the two callers said, and both of them, without question, they backing the president 100%. They think that he has handled this very well. Issues in the country, Beverly, if you listen to her, she says she believes that things are being sorted and that Trump has no clue what he is talking about. Can I phrase the question to you this way, and it's around President Ramaphosa, with the recent reports suggesting that he possibly could be on some departure lounge. If he were to take an early exit, do we have someone as equally capable of taking the mantle forward or taking this country forward as President Ramaphosa, or do you believe perhaps that the president has done his bit and it is time for someone else to take the mantle?
Well, Xoli, I often don't, comment, on, the domestic politics per se. I try to stay away from that and focus on the area of my, research, international relations. But I would say, with regards to the G20, the president has done a fantastic job. It was, the diplomatic maneuvering that has had to happen, pulling all of those, major economies together to drive at a consensus. That is not an easy task at all. I mean, it's a monumental feat that has been achieved by President, and his team. I think he has to be, lauded, for that. Yes, the whole country came together and, worked very hard, to drive, at the success that we have attained. And certainly, his leadership came to the fore there. Whether or not, somebody else, can also do a good job. Look, South Africa has, plenty of talent, and, I think, we're not short of talent, in the country.
Yeah.
I wouldn't, even, go to that kind of, discussion. We have a president right now, and the president has done a fantastic job with the G20.
Yeah.
And it's there for the world to see whether or not he's going to choose to stick around or maybe leave. I don't know what is going on there, but where South Africa's diplomatic activities are concerned, I think the president has been doing very, very well.
Mikatekiso, I apologize for launching you into domestic politics. Let me take this question to the person who probably will be able to deal with it. Professor Dirk Coetzee, the succession debate in the ANC, it seems it is in full swing. What do you think will happen if President Ramaphosa were to take an early exit, perhaps not of his own accord, but because he is being pressured from some corner? What do you think is going to happen? And in fact, are those discussions even going on, or is it just us, the media, going on a frolic of our own?
Yes, I must be honest, I think there's more of a public discussion about it than a discussion really in the inner circles of the ANC on this. There was apparently a discussion at one of their last NEC meetings about it, and then President Ramaphosa, as I heard it, challenged them and say, those who want me to leave, please stand up, and no one did. So I think where we are in terms of this is, it's not the situation of the past, of President Mbeki or President Zuma that were recalled by the ANC, and then they either had a sort of an interim arrangement or they elected a new president. The fact of the matter is that the ANC does not have a majority of 50% plus one in parliament anymore. So they cannot elect a new president on their own. That's the simple reality. Our constitution says that the acting president can act for only a maximum of 30 days. That means a month. Thereafter, an election for a new permanently elected president must take place. That means that the ANC will have to negotiate with other political parties in order to reach the point of 50% plus one in order to elect a new president. So it's a completely new ballgame. We saw it last year already, how they had to negotiate after the election. What will be, I think, highly problematic is for a president to vacate his seat if he hasn't even reached halfway of his term. I mean, it's now a year and a half out of the 5 years. What will then be the justification to have voted him in the first instance as the president? So I think these are difficult questions that is going to be very difficult to answer. Because if President Ramaphosa leaves his office as national president, we don't talk about ANC president, just as national president, the arrangement around the government, what is now called the government of national unity, will most possibly have to change. Because whoever is then the newly elected president will be someone most possibly coming from the ANC, but who has alliances with parties that might not be at the moment in the government of national unity. So that will create a lot of, I would argue, of instability in the government. While what we are seeing, yes, the government of national unity had its very serious birth pains, but it looks like as if those are becoming less and less. These successes that we've seen just now with the government with the G20, that's also the fact that it looks like there's an early turnaround in terms of the economy. Job creation is becoming, or unemployment is becoming very slightly less.
Yeah.
The issues around these investigations of the police service, that it looks like there's more urgency dealing with corruption than in the past. These are all early signs of what I would call some element of success. And if President Ramaphosa leaves now, then there's no guarantee that these things will continue. And I think the country as a whole it will be to the detriment of the country as a whole.
Professor Dirk Coetzee, thank you very much indeed for your analysis and insights tonight. Alongside him, Mikatekiso Kubai. He is also from UNISA, an international relations researcher. Thank you to both of you for your contributions tonight. All right.